Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about my adventures with Superman, Season 2, Episode 3. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. This episode hit me with a lot of wait, whoa, with just the DC stuff that was just kind of dropped in this episode. Well, first and foremost, the opening where Clark saves a guy from a fire, which he discovers a new ability, which we'll get to that in a second. But the person he saved, and he just name drops himself, being like, he's like, oh, my name is Silas Stone. I was like, wait, Silas Stone, as in Victor Stone's dad, Victor Stone, aka Cyborg. I was like, that is so interesting, because that's the thing of I'm curious to see how much of the broader DC universe this is going to really cover. Obviously, it's villain wise. I mean, once again, we have someone like Deathstroke, who initially was a Batman villain, but now is more also often associated with being a Teen Titans villain. But there's also he's also been more recently live action wise, back to being kind of associated with Batman, but also he's also been associated with Green Arrow, because of the Arrow TV show where he popped up. But anyway, my point was, I was like, oh, that's so interesting, especially because I was like, wait a minute, so how old is Vic in this? Which Leslie immediately answers that. She's like, yeah, Vic's 9 or 10. So I was like, interesting, because my knowledge of Cyborg is I know obviously the original Teen Titans cartoon from the early 2000s on Cartoon Network. It's been a very long time since I've seen it, but I know we cover some of Vic's Cyborg's backstory, but I don't know how deep we ever go into it. My more recent memory is obviously, Doom Patrol, because he plays one of the main characters. He's one of the main characters in the Doom Patrol TV show. So obviously a lot of Vic's past gets covered in that. And at least in Doom Patrol, the accident that leads to him becoming Cyborg happens when he's in high school. So I don't know if that's canonical to who he usually is. I mean, to be fair, he does kick it with the Teen Titans. I mean, eventually he eventually becomes a member of the Justice League, but often than not, he's associated with the Teen Titans. So I don't know what the age differences typically are between Cyborg and Clark. Once again, Kryptonians also age slower than humans too, so you have to take that into account. But I was like, that's so interesting. But it's also kind of sad. Well, because Silas's wife, aka Vic's mom, doesn't come up in the conversation. So I know in the show, in Doom Patrol, the accident that led to him becoming Cyborg, his body being so damaged, his dad had to basically make a choice. I know that involved his mom's death, but I don't know if that's typically how that happens in the comics or not. I also don't remember too much from the Justice League movie either, because obviously I'm sure that was covered in that, and I just don't remember because it's been a hot minute. But yeah, like I said, it was just, my point was because we know Clark's in his early to mid 20s, so I was like, right, so I guess they just maybe naturally had that age gap. I mean, it's because like I said, Vic would have been in his mid 20s maybe during Doom Patrol, because by the time he shows up in Doom Patrol, which he's there pretty early on, it's I think he'd been doing the Cyborg thing for 5 years, I think they had said at that time. So like I said, he was in his early-ish to mid-20s. So I just thought that was so interesting. So I was like, right, so we are a while away from him becoming Cyborg in this continuity if he's 9 or 10. So it is interesting, once again, too, what villains are we going to get this season? And it's yeah, we have Livewire just out and about. She was a hired gun this episode, but yeah, so it's okay. Because once again, a lot of those villains escaped. The only one that got captured again, once again, was Parasite, aka Ivo, which, to be fair, he's also back in the suit. So either they got it back or some version of it back for him to be in the suit. I didn't comment on that last episode, but yeah, just either way. I went on this massive tangent there at the beginning. I'm sorry, but it's just I just thought that was so, once again, just DC lore just kind of getting dropped in this universe. There's some others that I'll get to in a second, but it feels like this season might lean into the struggle of balancing Clark Kent with Superman. It wasn't as prevalent in the first season. I mean, that's always the struggle of all superheroes, but I feel like it wasn't as much of a struggle. I mean, balancing the secret identity thing was obviously with the whole dynamic of hiding it from Jimmy and Lois. It was there, but it feels like this season's going to be really this season, because he's feeling like he can't keep up. He even says later on he blames himself for being late, because it's right, I'm trying to do the superhero thing, but I'm also trying to do the Clark Kent thing. It's not the easiest thing when literally my girlfriend's dad is staying with me, and he's not the biggest fan of Superman. He's also not the biggest fan of me, Clark Kent, because he thinks I'm not good enough for his daughter, which I'm sure in Clark's eyes, like, sad thing is Clark would also believe that too. Lois would never believe that, but Clark himself would, because he already kind of naturally feels like, oh, like, Lois is amazing and great, like, I'm not good enough for her, and her dad probably, like, reinforcing that belief in him. Because it's like, right, you're late, you're clumsy, which are all the hallmarks of what makes Clark Clark. To be fair, that's him, like, leaning into the Clark of it all, but it's also like, right, he is like I am curious, like, how much of that is actually him playing into it, because Clark is, like, clumsy and goofy, but it's like, that's why I'm wondering, like, because at this point in time, he hasn't probably really gone above and beyond to, like, distinguish, like, oh my god, I'd be clumsy and not, like, extraordinary at all. Like, it doesn't seem like it hasn't really come up that he's had to really hide that aspect of himself. Because I think in this stage, just the persona that he is as Clark Kent is who he is. You know, this thing I can never remember who said this line. I always hold on to this quote of, like, basically the difference between, like, Marvel and DC, where it's like being the superhero is the mask, and being the real like Peter Parker. Peter Parker is who you really are. Spider-Man's the mask. Whereas I feel like in this universe, in DC, it's the vice versa of, in this case, Clark Kent is the mask and Superman is who you really are. So, but my point is, like, Clark Kent is kind of who he really is, like the clumsy, like, late Clark Kent. It's like, that's not him putting a persona to, like, hide himself. It's like, no, he's just like the disguise that is supposed to be Clark Kent is kind of still who he is. Like, that's not him putting on up front. That's like a lot of qualities he has to kind of create to become Clark Kent, so he hides himself from the world, from, you know, the people finding out he's Superman. It's just like, no, that's just him. So I think that's such an interesting thing I never really thought about when it came to season 1, but it feels like this season's kind of leaning into, like, like, that is just Clark in himself, so it's not even like him, like, leaning into it too much. That's what I was thinking about it. But I mean, once again, it's like he's falling behind because he's like, oh, I'm supposed to meet with Lois for, like, coffee or something, but then she can't show up because she's handling the Amertech situation. And then there's the whole situation with Clark also supposed to write an article, but he can't find the words for it because he's like, okay, I'm trying to figure, like, once again, like, balancing all three aspects of his life, multiple aspects of his life. Once again, just being Clark Kent, both, like, the boyfriend and the reporter, but then also Superman, the superhero, but also the boyfriend. So wearing many different hats and kind of juggling it as, once again, the traditional superhero thing. But speaking of Amertech, we find out one of the main scientists at Amertech is John Irons. And the moment they dropped that name, I was like, wait, as in John Henry Irons, aka Steel? I was like, dude, all thanks to Superman and Lois. Once again, most of my knowledge, both Marvel and DC, just comic book knowledge in general, some of the stuff I picked up and looked up on my own, but for the most part, it's usually live action stuff. Movies, but more so the TV shows. If it wasn't for Superman and Lois, that wouldn't have registered to me. It's like, oh, who is John Irons? Who's Steel? But it means something to me. I was like, oh, holy crap. I thought it was interesting, too, because whereas in Superman and Lois, Nat is his daughter, and this Nat is his niece, which I think is the case in the comics as well. I don't think it's a daughter situation. I think they probably wanted to make it a little more personable. Well, not even, because that's still family, but making it a more direct connection, especially with, if you've seen Superman and Lois, you know what John Henry Irons' story ends up being. So, shifting it from, like, niece to daughter, and also, I think, because her name's Natalie in Superman and Lois, but it's Natasha here, so, but I just thought that was it. I was like, man, that's so interesting, especially because he's made a steel suit at Amertech, which I thought was so fascinating. Because immediately you're like, wow, they've already laid the ground and foundation for where that storyline could potentially go in this continuity of, because his story typically is like Superman's gone and he ends up filling in for Superman. But I don't know if that's the route they're going to go in this storyline. But that's my understanding. I think that's how it plays out a little bit. There's a little bit of a storyline like that in Superman and Lois, but it's also like, I feel like that's part of his story in the comics as well. But, once again, people who are way more knowledgeable about the comics can correct me on that. We also had the introduction of, like, the Metallo robots, which I was like, whoa, as in like Metallo. And the guy who's running it, his name is Weston. And I was like, wait, he doesn't end up becoming Metallo or something. But I looked it up. Metallo's name in the comics is like John Corbin. So it's probably going to be someone else. But since they're introducing those suits, and we also know that Waller got her hands on some kryptonite last episode, it could easily be a thing of they end up, and we know they're experimenting on prisoners, but they're eventually giving it to soldiers and stuff. So it could easily be a thing of either he was some random person they tested on. I don't know enough about John's story in the comics to really pull from that. Like, I know I've seen versions of the character, but portrayed live action wise and animated wise from like the original animated series, but I don't know enough about Metallo. Like, I know Metallo, but I don't know enough of his backstory. But part of me, like, it seems like we're going to potentially set that up. So I'm curious, is he going to be someone that works for Waller and just becomes an experiment? Or was he just some random guy that was experimented on but kind of runs wild? We'll see where that storyline ends up going. But, like, the introduction of the Metallo robots. Because aren't there... I don't know if this always happens, but I feel like there was some storyline where, like... I don't know if it was a live action show or whether maybe it was something animated, but I was like, wasn't there a situation where they like built multiple Metallos? Like, as in the villain Metallo himself, like there were multiple, like they built multiple human cyborg things to make more of them. So I'm like, the fact is there's a whole bunch of robots. I mean, maybe that's the route they go. Like, at least for now, when it comes to Metallos, their core will be kryptonite like more traditional Metallo is, but not the human cyborg version. Maybe they'll later make the human cyborg version, or maybe in this version, in this continuity, there won't be a human cyborg version. They'll just be the robots who have kryptonite in them, because they're like heavily mass produced, and having a whole bunch of them injected with kryptonite against Superman would help a lot. So we'll see how that, like I said, that whole situation ultimately ends up shaking out. But obviously all the storylines with our three protagonists end up converging, because obviously you have Jimmy trying to balance being a boss for Flamebird, because he's not really... He thought, like, right, I just boss people around. He doesn't really know how to be a boss. To be fair, he wanted this whole operation to just be a solo thing, but then Flip is like, nah, there's like killer robots out there. I want to look into it, but it's like, no, you're too young. Then you have Lois, who was initially covering the Amertech side of things, which I felt so bad for Weston's assistant. And she was like, please don't make me do that. And she has to put on like the whole performance behind him and stuff. I felt so bad for her. But yeah, it isn't just Lois covering it, because she runs into Vicky. So it's like, I'm actually curious what Vicky and Lois's relationship is like in the comics. Are they like pitted, like, are they like, I'm assuming like rivals and stuff like that, but I'm curious, like, what are their like interactions like in the comics and stuff. It never crossed my mind to ever think about, like, well, it makes sense, they're both reporters, so it would make sense that, right, she mainly handles stuff in Gotham, which is so interesting that she's like kicking it here in Metropolis, but it's like, big news is big news. So she's also trying to do it just to kind of like stick it to Perry, I'm sure, just to be like, kind of rub dirt in his face of like, yeah, I'm on your home turf and I'm stealing your stories from you, which Perry's already pissed off about. So, but I love, like, yeah, like Lois and Vicky are a lot of like in just like their competitiveness for like getting the scoop, and her like one-upping Lois every chance she gets. But Lois is very stubborn and has that very stick-to-itiveness, that gumption, and she finds her way into Amertech and finds John Iron's lab destroyed, and then like Vicky's there being like, oh, you found the address. It's like, oh, and now we should go and run because the guards are after us. And she kind of like tries to leave Lois behind, does the whole, oh, no one like basically tells the story from Vicky Bell and blows her a kiss. And then later on, Lois is escaping on a garbage truck, blowing a kiss to her. Vicky's almost like very impressed, because she underestimates Lois a lot. It's like, right, you got a promotion. Oh, that Superman story you wrote, kind of rebuttal to my piece about Superman. It's like, right, she's kept an eye on Lois. She's like, right, she keeps an eye on young talent. But I'm sure there's also the element of like, well, it's also like, I got to keep my eye on the ball when it comes to competition, these young upstarts could come and try and snatch the throne from me as kind of top dog around here. But all of that converges with Clark, who got a mysterious message about, oh, like, there's like the killer robots, because Jimmy got it on Flamebird, but then like Flip was apparently able to like trace the phone, and that led her to John Henry Irons, which led eventually Clark and Jimmy there. And so all the storylines converge because Lois is just climbing into the window randomly, which I'm like, yo, that's super jacked up. You're just randomly strolling into some dude's place like that. And then like Vicky also got there at the same time too, and it's like, oh, Superman's here as well. But we find out the truth about, right, early on in the episode, it shows that the Metallo situation isn't as perfect as Weston wants to present it. In fact, Silas and John were like, yo, this isn't right. Like, the energy you're using to try and control them, and like you're saying like, oh, it's better than this and that, but it's very unstable. And it's like, you essentially made a gigantic bomb. Because the Metallos on their own are very unstable, but their cores, like when they're around each other, becomes a bomb. And that's what happened in the lab. But Weston, he's so busy trying to aim for the top. Now that the Amazotech has been removed from the board, everyone's gunning for that number one spot, and he doesn't want to miss his opportunity. So, it's like whatever the issue is, fix it, whatever. It's like he doesn't really care. And so Silas was like, what happened to Silas, and obviously what ultimately ends up happening to John, which is Livewire showing up, is because Weston's trying to shut down anyone that could potentially reveal the truth about what's going on. So I love that Livewire was like, wait, Superman, really? I don't get paid enough. I'm not getting paid enough for this. And then she just bounces. So I was expecting her to be in the episode more than she was. She's like, no, she's in like 2 scenes and she bounces. But once again, she's out and about. So they had to deal with the Weston stuff first. Because he activated the machine, and now like that power is going to go berserk if they don't stop it. So Clark trying to handle everything on his own, but he can't till he gets some backup from John, which I wasn't expecting him. Like, once again, I was like, yo, they dropped the suit, the steel suit, but I was like, oh, that's cool. I wasn't expecting him to actually suit up this episode. So him and Superman working together, once again, just timing wise, because obviously like that's a big thing in like Superman and Lois, John and Clark working together, teaming up. So the timing is just so like neat with just like that overlap of that kind of story beat and storyline element. Once again, it's not a 1-to-1. Cause I wonder, is he typically a scientist in the comics and stuff? Because he was a military dude in Superman and Lois, isn't he? Isn't he military? I mean, obviously he's good enough with tech and stuff, and obviously Nat is more got the brains for it than him, but he knows his way around tech. But I'm like, I think because like at least on their Earth, in Superman and Lois, he was a military dude. But I don't remember if he was on the other Earth that he's from. Either way, tangents and all that aside. I'd also completely forgot to talk about something I was going to talk about earlier, and that was Clark's new ability, which I was like, what is that? He's able to kind of create like an energy force field. Maybe that's something they're doing for like this show specifically. Maybe that is, because you never know, like there have been so many different people that have written Superman over the years. I'm sure like, yeah, there's your like foundational abilities, which everyone knows that which he's got, heat vision, X-ray vision, heat vision, cold breath, superhero, yada yada, so on and so forth. The ones we typically know. But I'm wondering, is that like a deep cut from the comics, or is that like the show being like, no, we're just doing our own thing? Because I was wondering for a second, it's like, well, we know his suit is Kryptonian based, so I'm wondering, is that something allocated to the suit? But it's like, no, his eyes started glowing blue, like as in like, okay, he's activating some latent Kryptonian ability. So I wonder what is that exactly? It just seems like he's able to create like an energy field. I wonder, what does that come from? Like, what would be like the in-universe reason for that? Like, is he able to take it in? Because obviously in his body is solar energy from the sun. So is he taking that solar energy and creating a force field, or is he like building up some like electricity in his body? Because it does seem more electrical based, but I mean, it might just, even with the blue and stuff, it could just be like no, that's just supposed to be energy in general. I'm curious what the in-universe thing would be of like how that operates, how he's able to create that force field. But basically when the thing was going to explode, he's able to use that to kind of keep it in place. And John going like smashing down like the poles that are kind of charging it. Even like when he gets stopped by the other robots, he gets out the suit, hammer in hand, and starts handling it, even without the suit, showing like his bravery of like, yeah, when the time comes, I'm going to do it myself, hammer in hand, and get it done. So I just thought that was interesting, and ultimately they were able to save the day. And Weston, I love the whole bit about, right, I just try to be number one. I'm not a bad guy. And I love Flip being like, well, the fact is Superman had to stop you, so that might make you want to have to kind of rethink your life a little bit. And it's like, it's like, well, he did cause some issues, but it's like, and well, he did threaten Silas, which Silas did just disappear. Like, they said, like, right, he went off the face of the earth after deleting his files after Leslie Livewire threatened him, which I was like, interesting, because I was like, well, he was working at Amertech, so I was like, we already know Star Labs already is a thing in this continuity because we literally went to Star Labs last episode. So I'm like, so I wonder, does he eventually pop up again and start working at Star Labs? Because I don't know if he's always associated with Star Labs, but he typically is. Like, I think in the movies, the Justice League movie, he was specifically the Snyder Cut. Like, I think he was associated with Star Labs. He's associated with Star Labs in the in Doom Patrol, so maybe he always is. So I'm wondering, like, oh, like, I doubt it's a thing of, oh, he worked at Star Labs and then eventually went to Amertech. Could be, but I'd assume that just means, like, somewhere in his future, he's eventually, once again, we got, like, a couple-year window, depending on when Vic becomes Cyborg, for him to potentially be working at Star Labs. So, like I said, it could just be a thing of, after this is all said and done, he never popped up again, but in the aftermath of everything, maybe he's able to kind of come out of the shadows, and then, like, eventually it's like, well, I'm not going to work at Amertech, but especially with how things play out at the end of the episode with Lex, but maybe, like, he eventually gets a job at Star Labs, and that kind of sets him on his path and what Vic's storyline will eventually become in this continuity. And I like the lessons and elements and story beats that kind of happen for our three protagonists. For one, Jimmy was talking to John about, like, being a boss and what it means, but it's like, right, it's not just about bossing people around, it's about basically uplifting people, which John is, that's why he does what he does. He wants to help his community, and so it's like, right, kind of supporting the people that are around you, and that's kind of a life lesson Jimmy takes away from this. Like, yeah, Flip is young, but she's got that spark in her, so it's like, right, uplift her, don't just tell her what to do, because she's very rambunctious and she's going to do her own thing, but guide her a little bit more and uplift her. And I think that's going to be Jimmy's approach to the whole boss thing. So that's definitely going to be interesting. Lois gets complimented by Vicky, who's like, oh, like, you could be my number 2 at the Gazette, which for Lois is like, oh my God, working with Vicky. When Vicky was first introduced, we found out how much of a big fan Lois is of her. Understandable. It's like, yeah, she's probably like the gold standard of reporter of like, yo, everyone anyone in Lois's position would want to be a Vicky Vale. And it's like, you could be my number 2, but for her, it's like, I would have to leave Metropolis. Like, her life is here, and she's, built a nice life for herself. But it's like, yes, but this place is so small. Like, there's only, like, in Vicky's eyes, it's like, there's only so much you could do here. And the fact is that basically your ambition is bigger than this place. Like, eventually nothing lasts forever, which, there's layers to that in a lot of ways for Lois. So it is a great work opportunity. But you'd also make the argument, it's like, well, you also have to think about it. Vicky maybe there's sincerity in like, oh, like, you would actually do great at the Gazette. We could work together. But you could also make the argument that's also Vicky just trying to wipe out the competition. It's like, oh, Perry's got some stiff competition for me at the Daily Planet. Better nip that in the bud and have her work for me, be my number 2. Not when we equals. It'd be like, I'd be number 1 and you be number 2. Like, that's something that's like, you can tell, like, there's layers there where you're like, I don't know if that's fully sincere or whether there's just kind of selfishness, like trying to wipe out the competition on Vicky's part. But then there's also Clark's element of 2 things. One, the continuous thing of, I can't tell. I haven't had the opportunity to really sit down with Lois and talk to her about the fact of this whole device thing that, the beacon that could help me find my cousin. Haven't really had an opportunity to talk about that because just things keep getting away, specific stuff about her dad and work, and it just, and now Lois has this thing that she kind of wants to talk to him about working at, the Gotham Gazette with Vicky. So, and breaking that, it's going to be a big thing, obviously breaking it to Jimmy, but also like breaking it to Clark, and especially with her dad being like, oh, you're not good enough for my daughter, which she's like, right, never said my dad is, never say that my dad is right ever again. But also, like, right, you saved the day and everything. It's just this time you needed some help. And for Clark, it's like that ended up being the inspiration for his article. And he writes about, like, yeah, Superman came in to save the day, but he, you know, when the going gets tough, it took someone like John Henry Irons stepping up, and he's the real hero of this situation, you know? And kind of showcasing, like, yeah, the beauty of what Metropolis is. Yes, we've changed over the years of what Metropolis was before to what it is now with everything going on, but kind of just defining that the fact is its people. Its people are what makes Metropolis what it is. Metropolis is its people, and that's been a, you know, that's a theme that, you know, is very prevalent in something like Supergirl, like the TV show. That was a theme and element that was quite often hammered home storyline wise about, right, it wasn't just Kara coming to save the day, it was like the city as a whole coming together, you know, to face down threats. I mean, kind of, I think the series ends on a storyline like that essentially, but you know, this kind of, well, you know, I was about to say it's kind of tangents aside, but it's all relevant conversation. So I think that's kind of interesting. But at the end of the episode, we see John helping, you know, repair stuff at Amertech, but sadly gets fired because, hey, LexCorp came in and swooped in and bought it up. So not only does he have to steal suits, but he also has the Metallo. But once again, because he has it, means it's all of Waller's stuff. So once again, what that means, once again, this army of Metallos, will we get the more traditional half human, half cyborg Metallo, or will we get these robots filling that void because they are Metallos, or will it be a situation of we start off with the robots and then eventually get to John Corbin, the more traditional Metallo? So it's some very, very interesting developments all across the board. It's going to be really interesting to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.